questions and answers, and in just a moment we will get to your questions and seek a Bible answer to every question. I want to take a minute, though, to remind you that coming up September the 29th is our fifth Sunday. And every fifth Sunday this year, we're having Victory Sundays, where we invite a guest speaker. And the guest for the fifth Sunday of September is Brandon Renfro, and he's going to talk about the theme, Do You Know Your Jesus? So I hope that you're planning to be here for that. We'll have the usual schedule of class and worship, and then the early afternoon worship with the fellowship meal after morning worship. But also that particular Sunday is special because we've designated that Friends and Family Day. So we hope to have a great big crowd that day. Invite as many of your friends and your family members as you can think of. We want to have a good crowd here that Sunday for Friends and Family Day, Victory Sunday, September the 29th. Tonight is Q&A, and we hope to have more questions. I didn't have a whole lot turned in the beginning to get us started. We got just enough to get us started, and then we're hoping that we'll have some questions texted in and we can answer over the course of the service. So if you'd like to do that, a lot of you already have this number in your phones, but the number is 205-440-2247. And we would love to try to answer your question as you send them in. Here's the first one for tonight. Is it okay? See, I thought this was going to be one I'd seen before, so these guys are already getting some in. Is it okay to boycott certain groups or establishments when you know they are sinning? Okay, so what about Christian boycotts? You hear about them all the time. I think with social media, this has come up even more because it's easier to issue a boycott to a lot of people and disseminate information, whether it's actually true or false. And there's a number of ways to answer this question. You could go from a practical point of view and ask the question, do boycotts work? And from what I've seen is while on occasion they have worked to get organizations to turn around, most of the time they don't work because these corporations we're talking about, whether it's an entertainment corporation or a retailer or a manufacturer of some kind or a brand, most of the time they've done their homework before they come out on a controversial issue, and they know how the public's going to respond. And they take into account how people will react, and so they know. So most of the time the boycotts don't work. However, when it comes to your conscience, you should always listen to your conscience. And so that's another factor to take into consideration. So another thing is it possible to be consistent in boycotting people, groups, establishments, when you know they are sinning? And the answer to that is you would almost have to completely withdraw from society in order to be consistent on this mark. Take into consideration, for example, challenging traditional home values and promoting homosexuality, transgender rights, same-sex marriage, and things like that. It's hard to find a corporation doing business in the world today that doesn't just support it, but also promotes that. And so you get to the point where you're asking, where do I buy my food? And what kind of entertainment can I consume? And where can I go and shop, etc.? And some people pick certain ones, and then they don't take into consideration, can I be consistent all the way across the board? So that's tough, but still I say follow your conscience. And if you want to make a stand in one particular area, by all means do that. The world needs to hear us, and if there's a way that you can speak out against sin in the world through not using some services or boycotting, by all means do that. There's nothing in the world wrong with it. Just make sure you're not withdrawing from society, because as Christians, our work is supposed to take place outside these four walls, not just in here where we worship. And so to make disciples in the world, you have to be in the world, not of the world, as Jesus puts it. And another important passage on this, I think, to look at is 1 Corinthians chapter 5. 1 Corinthians 5 deals with the discipline of a sinful man in the midst of the church at Corinth. His sin is listed, it's very grave, and evidently the church at Corinth was tolerating his sinfulness. And so something had to be said about it. Paul says you need to cast that man out from your midst. A little leaven leavens the whole lump. And he talks about withdrawing from him, not fellowshipping with him until he repents. Reason being that Paul wants to see his soul saved, and he's more concerned about the man's soul than he is the man's comfort or his fellowship or anything like that. But he makes sure to he makes a disclaimer at the end of the chapter regarding this withdrawal concept. And he makes it very clear that he doesn't mean for us to withdraw from the world. He's talking about withdrawing from a disorderly brother or sister in Christ. And this is where he picks up in verse 9 of 1 Corinthians chapter 5. I wrote you in my letter not to associate with sexually immoral people, not at all meaning the sexually immoral of this world, or the greedy and swindlers or idolaters, since then you would need to go out of the world. But now I am writing to you not to associate with anyone who bears the name of brother if he is guilty of sexual immorality or greed or is an idolater, reviler, drunkard, or swindler, not even to eat with such a one. So some people may have a problem. They think, well, we're not to tolerate it in church. Are we to tolerate it outside the church? And Paul does make a distinction, I think, obviously for the sake of evangelism. You can't come out of the world. The Lord doesn't mean for us to become hermits and withdraw from the world. He wants us to be here exerting our influence for Christ, making disciples, helping people lead them away from sin into fellowship with Jesus through the gospel. So that's a good question. It probably deserves a lot more thought than I gave it. Please help explain why Psalm 40 points to the Messiah. Let's turn over to Psalm 40. It's a lengthy psalm here, about 17 verses. And I'm going to try to find the part that the person asking the question is talking about. Not exactly sure. I'm not sure what makes this a messianic psalm, to be honest with you. I'm looking. I'm just skimming over it. And maybe if we could give me a verse to look at, I could handle this a little bit better. I'm sorry. I'm not finding the point here. So maybe a little clarification would help us. If you're here tonight, you can text that in. Do souls exist before they are born? Now, maybe you've wondered this before. I remember when I was a kid growing up, I had this idea, and I'm not sure where it came from, that babies existed before their birth, that there were souls in heaven that then became babies and were born into the world and then developed, and then they died and then went back to heaven. This kind of cycle, and it's really the idea of the soul as eternal. And I don't believe the Bible teaches that the soul is eternal. The Bible teaches that the soul is immortal, which is different from being eternal. Eternal means no beginning, no ending. Immortal indicates a beginning perhaps, but no ending. Souls are immortal. They have a beginning point, but no ending. Where did we get this idea? Well, I'm not sure. There are fairy tales and folklore and philosophy that contribute to that. The Greeks had this idea. Socrates, for example, said, all learning is remembering. Because there was this idea in Greek thought that nobody really begins to exist. They're just reincarnated into another life. And soul carries on from one incarnation to another incarnation. So for some reason, the trauma of birth causes us to forget everything. And the learning process is just a way of remembering what you already knew before. And I don't believe that's true, but that is an ancient idea, a very old idea that may have contributed to some of the folklore and fairy tales. I believe maybe I got the idea of souls existing before birth from Dumbo. Is that in Dumbo where the stork carries a baby? Or just the idea of a stork carrying a baby from heaven to its parents? You know, that's an idea that a baby had an existence before birth. And there are other ideas and fairy tales and things about that, but the truth of the Bible is that we're created body and soul at the point of conception. That's when we begin to exist as an entire person. And a good place to look is Psalm 139, where David is talking about the omnipresence of God. And in verse 13 he says to God in prayer, he says, "You formed my inward parts, you knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works, my soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed substance. In your book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when as yet there was none of them." Now, this is a helpful passage of Scripture when you're considering the problem with abortion, because it answers the question, when does life begin? But it's also helpful for answering this question, when does life begin? Life begins when the body and soul are knit together by the Creator in the mother's womb at conception. And then from that point forward, a person exists. Now, at death, physical death, is the body and the spirit are separated from one another. James chapter 2, verse 26. But that's only temporary, and the body returns to the dust as it was, the spirit unto God who gave it. Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verse 7. And then when the Lord returns, there'll be a resurrection of the wicked and the righteous, where the body and spirits are joined back together again, and then those are eternal in that state. John 5, 28 and 29. So that's an interesting question. And I think hopefully that clears it up, because a lot of us have had this idea of the eternal nature of the soul, when to be technical about it, we should speak of the immortal nature of the soul. What does it mean that out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks? Well, what it means is garbage in, garbage out. If you take bad stuff into your heart, then your life is going to produce bad stuff. It all begins perhaps with that fundamental proverb of Solomon in Proverbs chapter 4, verse 23, which talks about keeping your heart with all vigilance, for from it flow the springs of life. Everything you decide to do, every action you take, every word you speak comes from within, from the heart. And as the Lord explains on another occasion, Mark chapter 7, that's what defiles a person, what comes out of your heart. He's talking to people who are criticizing His disciples for eating with unwashed hands. They're saying they're eating with uncleansed hands. And Jesus says it's not, what goes into you, but it's what's inside of you that comes out. That is what defiles a person, your heart. So the heart is the central issue. And just like your actions and decisions and emotions come from your heart, so do your words. So that's what that means. Be careful what's in your heart. It will show with your words. I suppose for a while you might be able to fake it and be very careful about how you speak. But when you let your guard down and your emotions run hot or you get tired, eventually you're going to say what's on your mind. That's just human nature. And Jesus tells us in Matthew 12 that we'll be held accountable for every idle word that we speak. So we need to get our hearts straight so that our words are straight. Did the people of the Old Testament worship with instrumental music? As far as I can tell, they didn't until the time of David, although there are occasions here or there, such as Miriam with the tambourine, in which it was possible they were. So I can't say with 100% certainty that they didn't worship before David with instrumental music. But when David came on the scene, that's when professional musicians were brought into the temple. That's when they began to refer to the instruments as the instruments of David. Later on, I think it's the prophet Micah who says, "Woe to them who play the instruments of David, because they were not worshiping with hearts to the Lord." It was just an outward thing, an external thing their worship was. It was stale, it was hollow. But it's really interesting how the instrumental music in the Old Testament is referred to as the instruments of David. So it seems that David was the one that invented that brought that into temple worship when he moved the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem. And then it was later solidified, of course, by his son Solomon. Based on James 5:14, should we literally be calling on the elders to be present and active in prayer for the sick, or does adding them to a prayer list and praying for in public assembly suffice? Should we, as our responsibility, call the elders when we are sick? Well, let's read James, and I think it's important to get the spirit of what James is saying here. First of all, James is not giving orders here. He's giving encouragement to people, and he's talking to them about the power of prayer within the church. And this really begins in verse 13, where he asks, "Is anyone among you suffering? Let him pray. Is anyone cheerful? Let him sing praise. Is anyone among you sick? Let him call for the elders of the church and let them pray over him, anointing him with oil in the name of the Lord. And the prayer of faith will save the one who is sick, and the Lord will raise him up. And if he has committed sins, he will be forgiven. Therefore, confess your sins to one another and pray for one another that you may be healed. The prayer of a righteous person has great power as it is working. The effectual, fervent prayer of the righteous man availeth much." And then he goes in to talk about the example of Elijah and how powerful Elijah's prayer is. So there are a few things to draw from that. And one is, he's setting a precedent here of elders being shepherds for the church. And so shepherding the church, being a pastor of the church, to use another term, elders are called shepherds in Ephesians 4:11 and 1 Peter chapter 5 and in Acts chapter 20, verse 28. A part of that is praying. Prayer is a very important part of an elder's work with the people. The apostles recognized that as an important part of their work in Acts chapter 6, and it was so important to them, they refused to be distracted from it with this distraction of distributing food to the widows. And you might remember there was a disturbance that arose. The Jewish widows were getting an allotment of food while the Hellenistic widows were being overlooked. And so that is a very important part of the work of a shepherd. And as a member of the Lord's body, one of the many, many privileges and advantages you have is to be able to live and worship and work under an eldership who is willing to pray for you. And one of the reasons that's so good is because they have experience with a congregation and they know you. And then also they are spiritually minded men, spiritual leaders. And this passage in James has a lot to do with the power that comes from a person who is spiritually minded. It matters who's praying for you, is what James is saying. That's why he brings up the example of Elijah. Elijah was a man with a nature like ours, and he prayed fervently that it might not rain. And for 3.5 years it didn't rain, and then he prayed, and heaven gave rain, and the earth bore forth its fruit. The key there to verse 16 is the prayer of a righteous person has great power as it is working. Proverbs 15:29 says, "The Lord is far from the wicked, but He hears the prayer of the righteous." And 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 12 says, "The eyes of the Lord are over the righteous, and His ear is open to their prayer, but the face of the Lord is against those who do evil." So elders obviously should be righteous people. So they're going to be, the first candidate that you can think of when you need fervent, effectual prayer. That doesn't mean there aren't others that you can call upon. I think maybe that's the spirit of this question is, do we have to call on the elders? Are we wrong if we get sick and we don't call for the elders? Maybe we don't call anybody. Maybe we call the minister. Maybe we call a friend. Maybe we call a parent. Maybe we call an elder from another church. It doesn't say that you're sinning if you don't call for the elders. What it's saying is you have elders there, and you should feel blessed to have elders there because they're righteous people and their prayers they're powerful as they work on your behalf. And that's the spirit behind that question. And I think that's a good question. Please summarize the book of Ezekiel. That's a funny one right there. But I think that we can place it on the timeline of the history of the Jewish people and help out a little bit. The book opens with Ezekiel being among the exiles on the Kizer Canal, that's in Babylon, during that 70-year time period in which God's people were captive in Babylon. They had been wicked, worshipped idols, disobedient to the Lord, and so the Lord sent the king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, in 586 BC to eventually crush and destroy the people of Israel. And those that survived were taken captive to the land of Babylon. And Ezekiel is among the Babylonians. Now, it's really interesting to think of Ezekiel as being contemporary with two other men. He was contemporary also with Jeremiah and Daniel. And Jeremiah was among those who fled the Babylonian captivity. He didn't choose this, but they took him by force down to Egypt to run away from that. And Jeremiah lived through the destruction of Jerusalem, and he saw awful things, and he did this as an old man to boot. And then Daniel pretty much was raised in foreign courts. He was taken as a young man into the courts of Babylon, and then Ezekiel was in exile in pretty much like a refugee camp, something like that. And so a good question I like to ask when I'm teaching this time period in class is, who would you rather be? Would you like to be with Jeremiah, who's just on the run, or with Ezekiel among your own people in a refugee camp? You might not have the best food, you might not have the best conditions, but you're with people that understand you, and you've got numbers on your side. Or with Daniel, which you're living with all the comforts of life, but you're surrounded by heathens and your life is threatened and in jeopardy all the time, and you're being thrown into a lion's den, and your friends are being thrown into fiery furnaces because you stand up for the Lord. I don't want to be any of them, but if I had a choice, I think I might choose Ezekiel, although Ezekiel had a very hard life. Now, Ezekiel is full of visions, so you have to understand that, and it's not necessarily in chronological order. And there's a lot about the book of Ezekiel I certainly don't understand, but I do get a general picture of the glory of God and how it has temporarily left Israel, but it plans to return, namely to return to Jerusalem. So the visions begin in chapter 1 with this picture of the glory of God, and it's on the move. There are wheels involved, and there's really strange things in that vision. And then off and on, you'll see pictures of it moving, and you'll see people measuring the temple, and you're thinking, there's no temple, it was destroyed. Well, it's a sign that the temple will return and the glory of God will return to Israel. And all of that occurred to encourage the captives on the Kizer Canal with Ezekiel to continue steadfastly in the Lord, to continue to study the law, to prepare themselves because they would return. And eventually they did when Persia conquered Babylon and Cyrus released those captives, some of them who had been alive during the days of Ezekiel, to go back to their homeland and rebuild in the days of Nehemiah and Ezra. Who did Adam and Eve's son marry? Well, they had several sons, and I guess, kids, you're going to be grossed out by this, but I think they married their sisters. Those are different times. People were different in those days. There was just Adam and Eve were the only two people on earth, and the whole human race came from then. So I'm going to gross you out even more. We're all kind of brothers and sisters in that sense. But, things are a lot different. The gene pool is a lot different today than it was back then. In the context of the church, our fundraisers wrong. For example, raising money to go on a mission trip. Well, let's just look at the pattern of, whenever I get a question like this, I just say, let's go back to the New Testament. Let's look how the New Testament church did things, and let's do things the way the New Testament church did. So this is a very good question, because the New Testament church funded work. They dealt with money. They talked about money. They contributed money. They helped Paul, for example, to go on all his missionary journeys and furnished his support. So how was that done? I'll try to do this in an organized way so it doesn't get real confusing. But what you find is that the church financed their work, the Lord's work, through free will offerings. And you've heard this verse many times. Let's go back to it in 1 Corinthians chapter 16. This is a very clear example of how the work of the Lord was financed in the early church. Verses 1 and 2, concerning the collection for the saints, as I directed the churches of Galatia, so you also are to do. On the first day of every week, each of you is to put something aside and store it up as he may prosper, so that there will be no collecting when I come. And then he goes on to talk about how he will use that collection for the poor saints in Judea and deliver it by hand to those. In the second epistle to the Corinthians, he's still collecting this offering. And he's asking them to give freely and generously. And in chapter 9, verse 7, he says, each one must give as he has decided in his heart, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. What is he doing? He's raising support. And he's raising support from a variety of sources. A very interesting statement is made in Philippians chapter 4, verses 15 through 18, where he says, no church has partnered with me as you have in giving and receiving. So it seems that possibly, and that statement's not 100% clear, but it seems that maybe Philippi served as a sponsoring church for Paul. They were receiving funds from churches like Corinth, for example, and delivering them to Paul so that he could have all of his needs cared for. He said he had a special working relationship with the church at Philippi. And he goes on to say in verse 18 that giving like that, free will, not reluctant, not under compulsion, generous giving, a cheerful giving, is worship to God. He uses the language of the Old Testament sacrifices, a soothing aroma to God. So those are some passages to think about that involve how the church acquired funds to support the work of the Lord. And you don't see a bake sale or a car wash, or you don't see any kind of fundraising in that way. This says raising money to go on a mission trip. There's nothing wrong with raising money to go on a mission trip if you're raising that money through free will offerings. I think the way it's done here, with a lot of people that go on campaigns here, is they might send letters out to people within this congregation, other congregations, say, I'm going on this trip, we're going to do this amount of work, we're going to stay gone this time, it's going to cost this much money, can you help me out? And Grandma or Brother Jones over in this church, or the elders here at Ashville Road, or some good families here decide I'm going to help them out, and they contribute money to that. That's a free will offering. Just like putting money in the collection plate on the first day of the week is a free will offering. And so just because it's happening, independent of the church's budget, that doesn't mean that it's a violation of some of the things we're reading here. Paul's doing that very thing. That's very, very close to what you see Paul doing in some of the passages I described. The things that make me uncomfortable, to be honest with you, are when we're doing services and earning money, like in a business relationship with the community, for example, or even with each other. Car wash, $5, and we're going to use that money to pay for this or that. That's not free will offering. That's not the pattern of the New Testament. And so that would be a distinction that I would draw on that particular practice. Are doubts a sign of weak faith? Number one, doubts are a sign of all faith. If you say you have faith with no doubt, that may be blind faith, because anybody who lives in this world and is challenged and tested is going to have doubts. And then yes, depending on the amount of doubts that you have, it is a sign of weak faith. I mean, doubt weakens your faith. But as you grow in Christ, you get stronger and stronger, and your faith has fewer doubts. But don't feel that just because you doubt, you have no faith. And I hope y'all aren't tired of me going to this example, but I'm going to go back to Mark chapter 9 because it's a microcosm of Christian growth. This man is growing so fast in Mark chapter 9 that it helps me answer this question. He's this man with the demon-possessed boy. I talked about him in class this morning. I can't quit talking about him. There's just so much in this story. But he comes to Jesus' disciples and they can't cast the demon out of his son. And Jesus comes and he begins to talk with the man, as Jesus always does. He has conversations with people and he listens to people. So he's listening to this man, and the man says in verse 22, if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us. Now that's weak faith, really weak faith, because he's talking to the Lord and he's not even sure that it's possible for Jesus to do anything, if you can do anything. And Jesus says in verse 23, if you can, all things are possible for the one who believes. So he's saying, first of all, you got to get it out of your mind that something can be impossible for God. God is omnipotent. He can do anything. Now, He may not choose to do anything. He may not do everything, but He can do everything. And so the man changes there immediately, Mark says, his favorite word. But it's interesting because it shows how quick the growth is in this man. Immediately, the father of the child cried out and says, I believe, help my unbelief. So does he believe or does he disbelieve? Which is it? And the answer is both. He has doubts, but he believes. But here's the correction that he made that strengthened his faith just like that. The correction that he made is he decided, I'm in doubt about how this is going to work, but I'm no longer in doubt about the ability of the person that I'm talking to. And so he had faith in the right object, and a weak faith in the right object is much more powerful than a strong faith in the wrong object. So he didn't have faith in Jesus the first time, if you can, but now he has faith in Jesus, so he's going to get somewhere. And did it work out for him? It did. So if your doubts are there, ask yourself, am I doubting the existence of God? And then am I doubting the existence of a God who can do all things? What am I doubting? And that'll determine the weakness of your faith. Without doubts, you can't really judge the strength of your faith because you're not aware of any challenges and your faith is really blind. And that's not the kind of faith you read about. The faith of the Bible is a living, breathing faith that is challenged all the time and gets stronger and stronger. How do we keep from becoming discouraged by the rejections when evangelizing? Well, that's a really good question. It's hard. And it gets harder the closer you are to the people who reject you. A cold call evangelism, such as knocking doors or making phone calls or sending out mailers or doing something on social media, it can hurt when people say, not interested, or you're a loony, or whatever they say. That can hurt, but it really hurts when a family member tells you that they disagree with you, or they don't want to listen, or they want you to stop talking to them about church or about Jesus. That can be really hard. And the only way that I can think of that you can keep from being discouraged is to remember why you're doing this. You don't want to quit. It's going to hurt. People are going to mock and ridicule you. But you have to remember why you're doing this in the first place, and that's because there is good news. And people are lost without it, and you want them to hear the saving gospel of Jesus Christ. And that's the best answer I can give to that. Would Adam and Eve have been banished from the Garden of Eden if they were lazy and did not keep it well maintained? Genesis 2:15 says they were placed in the garden to keep the garden, to tend the garden. Maybe this question is searching for a second commandment. You know, we usually explain the Garden of Eden as having one commandment, not to eat of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Maybe this is a second commandment. Keep the garden well maintained. And it's a hypothetical question, but I'm not sure. I suppose it's possible, but the only time the penalty of banishment and of death was given was with the commandment not to eat of the tree of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. And that action would be very different, don't you think, than just being lazy. I mean, I'm not even sure if it was possible for them to become lazy enough. What were the working conditions? Work in the Garden of Eden was very different than work now. And after the curse, the earth changed, and work became toilsome. It became a drudgery. Cursed is the earth because of you. Genesis chapter 3, verse 17. From that moment forward, work changed. So that's why I'm having such a hard time answering this question, because I don't know if it was even possible to be lazy in the former circumstances. And what I'm looking at here is that I have a full expectation that in heaven there will be work, but it won't be the kind of work we're going to have to get up and do tomorrow morning that makes Mondays so horrible. I think that the work we have will be a joy, and it will give us a purpose, and we'll celebrate work, and it'll be service of the Lord. So it's a really tough question to answer for that reason. I recently heard someone refer to Romans 6, 3 and 4 as a dry baptism, describing it as a cleansing of your spirit and ready to walk a new life with Christ. Is there anything possibly in the Greek that would lead someone to think this is not immersion? No. The English wording, the only word that's not translated well here in Romans 6, 3 and 4 is the word baptize. And if you gave it a better translation, it would lean more towards water immersion than away from it, because the word baptize was created by people who were already sprinkling instead of immersing. And the Greek word baptizo literally is a verb meaning to immerse. It doesn't necessarily include the item it's immersed in, but you have to read this in the context. And baptism occurred in water in the New Testament. I mean, there are other baptisms, but in the epistles, Paul says there is one baptism, Ephesians 4, and he was clearly talking about water baptism, especially when you connect it to Acts chapter 2, verse 38. So there's nothing here to suggest dry baptism. I think the only reason you would try that is because you're sold on this idea of salvation by faith alone without baptism. And this passage, of course, presents a problem for that, because it says that it's not until you're coming out of the waters of baptism that you walk in newness of life. It puts the newness of life after baptism. And so this is an example of somebody trying to retrofit the Bible to work with their preconceived notions. It's just not going to work. Thank you for the great questions tonight. There were some tough ones in there, and I apologize if I didn't answer some of them very well. You always know how to keep me on my feet, so I appreciate that and enjoy studying with you in this way. We want to extend the gospel's invitation. It's always open, but tonight is a convenient time for us to remind you that the Lord always calls, and He's always willing, and He's always knocking, asking for us to open the door of our hearts and let Him in. We'd love to pray with you. We talked about the power of prayer tonight. There are righteous people here who would love to word a prayer on your behalf. If you need our help, please don't hesitate, but come right now as we stand and as we